Song came after that. I didn't expect that. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. My sisters, myself, our spouses, our children, moms, brothers, and sister, all really appreciate you all being here today to celebrate, remember, and honor our mom, our sister, and our parent. Ecclesiastes 3:4 words. To everything there is a season, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. I think that's a fairly common verse to be shared at a funeral for obvious reasons. Yet there's something about that verse that really reminds me of it. Regardless, today is a time to weep and mourn. However, it's also a time to laugh. I hope you can mourn with us today, but also share stories through our time together that makes each of us laugh. Honestly, I don't know what to do about the dancing, but if the mood strikes you, please by all means, let us know. I thought a lot about what we're doing here today. Why gather? Should we even speak? Should we just get together? Some will say that a funeral is for the surviving spouse. That is, all of them. My dad passed 23 years ago. So it's not for him. So is it for us, or is it for me and my sisters and our children? I'm not sure any of us would say I really need a funeral to provide closure. So is it for her siblings, her grandchildren? Is it for you all? Again, maybe, but I'm not sure anybody would say, boy, I really need this funeral. So it's a little bit about these things, but nobody's reasonable. I gave it some thought and really tried to figure out what I was going to say today and why. I realized I think it's a little bit about what I mentioned before, but I think it's really a time to honor my mom's life, honor her memory, and focus on her. So I've tried to structure our time together to focus on those things. I first want to read you the obituary, and I think my sister, Katie, did an excellent job there. Patricia Patti Lynn Humphreys, 76, of Sylvania, passed away peacefully on November 25th, 2025. Patti was born on August 30th, 1949, to William and Dorothy McMahon. A 1967 graduate of DeVilbiss High School, she continued her education at Bowling Green State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in 1971 and met the love of her life, Doug. Doug and Patti married on June 5th, 1971, and promptly jetted off to Hawaii, as Doug was serving in the Navy. That's where Patti started her teaching career. After the Navy, they put down roots in Sylvania, Ohio, where she continued her teaching career at Toledo Public Schools. Once kids came along, Patti took a few years off from teaching, but eventually returned back to the classroom at Maplewood Elementary in Sylvania Schools. Over her 25-year career, she taught first and second grade as well as math and English. A perfectionist by nature, she poured her heart and soul into her profession. She touched countless lives with her easy way of connecting with students. Although teaching was her profession or her professional calling, her true passion in her life came from the form of grandkids. Patti was blessed with 9 grandkids. She lovingly referred to as her 9 kiddos. In fact, most of her passwords were. Don't tell them. Her whole face would light up when we're talking about them. She enjoyed watching their musical or sporting events in person and sometimes even states away from the next occasion. Her artistic and creative touch was apparent in everything she did, whether it was teaching, gardening, or crafting with her grandkids. A beloved daughter, wife, mother, nana, teacher, and friend, she will be missed by them. Patti was preceded in death by her parents, William and Dorothy McMahon, and her husband of over 30 years, Evan Douglas Humphreys. She is survived by her children and grandchildren, Brett, Abigail, Emmeline, Benjamin, and Peter. Karen, Marty, Brooke, Carter, and Elise. Katie and Mike, Emerson, Evan, and Ethan Trout. Her brothers, Tom and Laura McMahon, Timothy McMahon, William and Deborah McMahon, and her sister-in-law, Kim Humphrey, as well as many nieces, nephews, and of course her beloved daughter. What Katie wrote was spot on. She loved her grandkids. One of the many things I try to do throughout the service is to weave as many of her grandkids into the service. So Mom had this poem she wanted read. As I was reading over her wishes, she had this poem she wanted read. I've asked Benjamin, Julie, and Ethan to each read parts of it. Benjamin, Julie, Ethan, would you mind coming up?
This is the poem, We Remember Them, by Sylvian Collins and Rabbi Jack Ryan. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them.
At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of the autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us, as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them.
When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now among us, as we remember them.
You clap. As part of that honoring her memory, I've asked two people if they'd be willing to share some stories of Mom, to help us remember and learn about her, aspects of her life, and the impact she had on others. So the first is Tom McMahon. Tom, come on. Tom's mom's name.
Gotta get out the specs. First of all, before I start on this today, I'd like to just say, I was talking to Liz Meister before we started, and she made a great point that Patti, and Liz and Patti were great friends, that Patti would be just amazed by how many people are here. And that, to me, when Liz said that, that's just a tribute to my sister, or our sister, your mom, of how many lives she touched. That is huge. So, okay, with that being said, I'm going to give you a few stories about Patti and myself. Okay? Just kind of work with this, okay? Growing up in the late 60s and 70s, I was a little rebellious, as some of Patti's friends know from Bowling Green. Patti and I used to fight occasionally, like cats and dogs, as siblings would do. But a number of times, she had my back and kept me out of trouble for reasons I can't explain. I'm going to give you a couple examples here. You'll probably get bored. You'll see how this goes. But one time I went out with a few of my friends, and after having a few too many, my friends left me at our front door and rang the doorbell. Luckily, my parents were not home. Patti answered the door. I stumbled in the house and promptly fell on the floor and got sick. She got me upstairs to my bed, cleaned up my mess, telling my parents the dog had thrown up on the floor. She had my back. Another time, you'll see a trend in this. Another time, my parents were out of town, and it was the middle of winter. And my parents' friends left their car in the back driveway behind our house on Wycliffe and asked me to start it up and let it run just a little to warm up because of these cold Ohio winters. Well, about the second time I went out to start the car, I decided to take it out for a little drive around the lawn. Well, of course, I did not have proper documentation. You can't hear that either. You can't hear that. To drive a car. Well, I get back, start pulling into the driveway and the backyard, and there is Patti staring me down. She gave me a few choice words, and I was thinking, I'm in real trouble when Mom and Dad get back. Well, she never told my parents. Again, she had my back. Then there was the time my friend Larry Armstrong and I hitchhike to Fort Lauderdale during Christmas break. You would no more think of hitchhiking to Fort Lauderdale now than Carter's got liver pills. We hitchhiked down. We had tickets to fly back, but we hitchhiked down. Well, by the time we got to Florida, we couldn't find a motel that had a room for us until the next day. Well, Patti and a few of her friends, and I believe Debbie Stellington was involved in this. In fact, I know she was. Had a motel room, and we stopped by just to say hello. Well, we didn't stop by just to say hello. When she heard our situation, she said we could stay at their place, but we had to sleep on the floor. Great. Had my back again. Okay. Then, there was a time I had tickets to go see the Rolling Stones at Cleveland Stadium. I mean, that was big back then, okay? Well, I got into a little trouble at home. See how this kind of rolls? And my parents wouldn't let me use their car. And my friend's car was not running. So I walked over to see Patti and Doug, who were living in New England Lane in Sylvania at the time. And I asked them, this is like nuts, could you drive us to Cleveland? Yeah, they're going to drive us to Cleveland, sit there while we watch a concert and bring us back. Well, instead of saying no, they let us drive Patti's Volkswagen, affectionately known as the Green Bean, to the concert. It was a green Volkswagen. Some of you who are in this room will remember that car, okay? This time, both Patti and Doug had my back. Later, after I grew up and came to my senses, Lori, my wife, and I got married and started to have kids. Patti would always send the greatest birthdays and Christmas gifts for our kids. They were always monogrammed, names, initials, and many times educational in nature, pulling from her teacher experiences. Later, when we started to have grandkids, she would do the same. When I would come up to Toledo to go up north to play golf with my buddies, I would stop by her condo and see her, and she would always have these toys that I had to stick in my buddy's van to take back to Alabama because she wanted me to. And this past week down in Alabama, my grandson, Patti, came over, and he wanted to ride in the wagon that Patti got us. Later, Patti also enjoyed videos and pictures of the kids that I would send her on the phone. She loved it. She'd always respond, and, oh, this is so great. It just gave her something, okay? After our mom passed, Patti and I would talk almost every week, or at least every other week, on the phone. She would love it when I put the phone on, put it on speakerphone, and Lori would get in the conversation, my wife Lori. As Patti would always say, with Lori on the phone, she always got the real story. Okay, to wrap up these few things about Patti, after she passed, Brett, Karen, and Katie were going through her house. The three of them came across 2 serving trays shaped in the state form of Texas that she found on Amazon and was going to send my daughter Casey and her family, who had just moved to Fort Worth area 2 months prior, but just never got them sent. She was a tad of a procrastinator. But that's how giving she was. Patti left a lasting legacy of always giving, whether it was her kids or her 9 grandchildren, who she called her kiddos, along with their brothers and their families. That's a lasting legacy.
So I was getting my hair cut this week. Since pandemic, Abby has been cutting my hair. And she cut this mess this week. She said, do you remember the haircut you got for Karen Marty's wedding? I said, no, I do not. I was sure she did. I also thought to myself, that was 22 years ago. How on earth would I remember that? But I'm not, I might be stupid, but I'm not that stupid. So I didn't say all those things that ran through my head. And she said, yeah, you left it to the last minute, which also isn't surprising. And she said, in your rush, you had to go to Grip Clips to get your hair cut. And you were really unhappy with it. You described it as if the person there had trimmed your hedges, not your hair. And you told your Grandpa McMahon, Tom and Patty's dad, about it. Do you remember what he said? I thought to myself, I think we've established how poor my memory is. And she said, well, what he told you is, Brett, get yourself to a dang barber. That was Grandpa. You know, kind of would get flustered and decide he was going to tell you something. And I remember that because Abby's telling me that story, right? Not all of us have memories like Abby. And so when Tom tells those stories about Patti, it reminds us of Mom, right? Like it brings out those things about Mom. That's how we remember her. We remember her through stories today. We remember her through a barbecue this afternoon. We remember her in 5 years when we're still telling stories, right? That's the way we hold that memory. That's what we need to do for Mom and for our Christian friends. Liz Meister is one of Mom's oldest and dearest friends. She taught with Mom for probably 2 decades, and their friendship started before that and lasted long after their retirement. Liz, I'd love for you to speak.
Okay, first of all, there are 11 pages here, but it's really big. My friendship with Patti started 40 years ago in the fall of 1986. Our family was living in Colorado, and we were being transferred to the Toledo area. On our home search trip, we ran into Doug Humphreys, who worked at Manville, and my husband worked at Manville. And we were telling him we were undecided where we were going to live. We found the same house, same floor plan, one in Highland School District, one in Central School District. So he said, you can call my wife, she'll help you. I called Patti, and I introduced myself, and we started talking. Doug went to the post office and returned. We were still talking. Doug went to Food Town. We were still talking. That call cost us over $25. Very expensive call back then, at least in our budget. And for those millennials and younger, we had to pay by the minute. We decided to buy our house in Jamesburg Woods based on that phone call. After we moved, we finally met, and I would call her for doctors and dentists, anything a newcomer in the area would need. She gave me advice about shopping. She introduced me to Sauter's, the Reading Railroad, and Charlie's Ice Cream, and lots of other local places. She and Doug recommended a church for us, Olivet, and we started attending there. Some Sundays, sorry you guys, but when you went to Sunday school, we went to breakfast. Eventually, we started walking together every morning at 6 o'clock. One morning, the phone rang at 4:45, and I'm like, oh crap, who could be calling me now? And I didn't want to wake up the whole family, so I quick picked up the phone. Now, if you know Patti, you know she had some very, very strange sleeping habits. I jumped to answer the phone so as not to awaken my family. She'd left her dog Shamrock out, and he'd run away. And would I help her find him? She picked me up, and we went searching, both of us. in our pajamas, hair uncombed, with windows open, calling for Shamrock in kind of a whispered yell. Shamrock! My door was partially open so that I could jump and grab. We drove all over St. James, and we were hoping we weren't waking the entire subdivision. Eventually, we did find him and took him home, but our walk was canceled. Another thing, story about Patti as a friend. We purchased a new house, and I was really busy with wallpapering and decorating the house. And she asked if she could come watch me wallpaper, because she'd never wallpapered before. I said, sure. A month or two later, we were at her house, wallpapering Kara and Katie's bedrooms. And that was when I learned what a perfectionist she was. Every line, every flower had to line up perfectly. I also had my very first salami roll-up, compliments of God. And I still love them. After 2 or 3 years of living in Sylvania, my son broke his arm 4 hours into summer vacation. He ended up having to have anesthesia to set it properly. I was scheduled for surgery on the same day, and we didn't want to cancel it. And we were scheduled 15 minutes apart to go into the operating room. Jeff's procedure went much faster than mine, and Jim brought Jeff to Patti's house to recover, and then he came back to see me. Just as I was leaving the recovery room. Patti cared for my son as she would have one of her own. When Doug was sick in Ann Arbor, I remember packing a huge care package filled with snacks, and water, and magazines for her, knowing that she would need sustenance through his stay there. Through the years, we were always there for one another. One Christmas morning, she was going to her mailbox to get her newspaper, and she slipped and broke her ankle. I became her chauffeur to school for 3 months, and we were always on time for school. It was the only time while we both worked there that we were both on time. Our summers would be spent at the JCC pool. We would usually meet around 2 o'clock, and our kids could swim, and we would yak until about 4, when we would go home and cook dinner. She loved gardening and had a special talent for putting the right plant in the perfect spot, with her own kind of flair, which was always artistic. At Brett's graduation party, she had red wax begonias lining every bed exactly 6 inches apart. She had planted these while sick and running a temp of 102. She taught me that garden beds should curve to look like a flowing river, and I have used that tip so many times in my own yard. We both spent our summers deep cleaning our houses. One time she called me and said, "Hey Liz, I found a new thing to clean." It was the return air registers. How many of you look to see if your return air registers need cleaning? What is that? Sure enough, I looked at mine and it was nasty. When we ran out of things to clean, we knew then it was time to go back to school and open our classrooms. Patti had her own special kind of magic with students in her classroom. She was just magic with those kids. And it began the very first day of school. Each year, her class formed a family. And it was a family of students and Patti. and they all loved each other and respected each other. One time, when the principal's daughter broke her arm in the last week of school and was going to miss all the fun stuff, she walked the whole class over to his house to wish her, to visit her and wish her well. One of my favorites was when a student had a birthday. The red lipstick came out, and they didn't kiss. And they wore that red kiss mark proudly for the rest of the day. Some kids wore 2 or 3. When her mom started going downhill health-wise, Patti felt the need to become a half-day employee to have more time with her. She became a math tutor for at-risk students to help bring them to grade level in math, and she called it Math Club. She made math fun for these kids. Kids who can't do math, they hate it, but she made it fun. Well, all the kiddos at all levels wanted to belong to Mrs. Humphreys' math club. So she made extra time and would bring other kids to math club too. During these years, money was very tight in Sylvania schools. It seemed as if we were working on passing a levy all the time. It was like every other year. We were still in the old building, and we passed the big one. The entire school district was celebrating. Patti took her class to 3rd floor Burnham, which were the administration offices, with a boombox and played the tutti tot. For those of you that are not familiar with the tutti tot, ask Alexa and she will explain and play it for you. Because I did that. Brad Rieger was superintendent, and he was the first one to come out and dance with the kids. And eventually, the entire 3rd floor staff was dancing along. Somehow my class was dragged in on this too. I think it might have been during a Friday buddy reading time. I taught 5th grade, and she taught both 1st and 2nd grades at different times. Every Friday, we would get our classes together for buddy reading. The little ones would read to the big ones and vice versa. It was the perfect end to a week. At the end of the year, we would go to Burnham Park and read Casey at the Bat. And then we would play our annual game of baseball. Her little ones always won by a hair, because my big ones somehow always lost. My 5th graders learned that you can be losers and still be winners just by watching the joy of the little ones winning. Children felt safe with Patti. They felt her commitment and that special security and love that kids need to open themselves to learning. She always had their attention and always knew each of her students' strengths and their weaknesses. Her last year of teaching, I'm sorry, I need to get her water. Her last, her last year of teaching, she had a really talkative student in her class. Only Patti Humphreys could get away with this. At the end of the day, she said to the student, "Why don't you go home and ask your dad about what duct tape is used for?" He came back the next day with the correct answer: to shut my mouth. woman who wore many hats. She was a wife, a mother, a sister, a teacher, a gardener, an artist, and a friend who gave so much to those around her. There are so many Patti stories I could share, but I'm not. Because I was told I couldn't. Some are happy. Some are a little, no, a lot crazy. Some are tender. And some are unfortunately sad. But I treasure every one of them. Patti, you will always hold a special place in my heart. We had the gift of a very special friendship. Over the holidays, I saw this prayer and it immediately brought you to mind, and I'd like to share it with you now. It was called Under the Christmas Lights. I smile for those still here and whisper prayers for those who are not. May our homes be filled with warmth and safety, and may heaven be filled with peace for the souls we miss. Love doesn't end, it simply changes where it lives. Patti, I pray that you are with God and you have found eternal peace. I will always love you, my friend.
We can keep it short if you want. That'd be quite a bit. All right. Thanks, Liz. You were and are a dear and faithful friend. Mom wanted 1 Corinthians 13 read on this day, and I've asked Brooke, Emerson, and Emmeline to share the reading of that chapter. Brooke, Emerson, Emmeline, would you mind?
If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but does not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be still, and where there is knowledge, it will pass away.
We know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, felt like a child, reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we only see a reflection as in a mirror, but then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
As we heard from Liz, Mom was an exceptional teacher. It was her life's work. In many ways, she was made for teaching. It was her call. Mom was also wildly creative. I should tell you, I'm mostly speaking to the grandkids at this point, just a little bit for me. I want to share some view of Mom, like Liz shared, that you may not have ever heard. Mom was wildly creative, like crazy creative. I believe she wanted to be a teacher until Grandpa guided her away from that. and just to be clear, guided is a euphemism. However, her artistic ability spilled out in so many things she did. A couple weeks back, we held a Christmas dinner in her honor. As we set the table, Katie came across these really cute name tags, just like for place setters, right? Every one of us had all 50 of us. Yeah. Why? I don't really know. They were like no-brainers for her, right? These cute little name tags. I mean, for Abby and I, two engineers, if we thought we would have struck artistic gold if we created this with like a whimsical thought, right? Like we'd be telling our children's children about this one time that we had these cute name tags. But for Mom, it was no big deal. It's a true story. Some of you may remember the software program AppleWorks. You all won't, but that's okay. It was the artist formerly known as ClarisWorks. This friggin' piece of software was the end. I was Mom's IT staff, and I kept her computers running throughout her teaching. My mom would create more things on that computer with AppleWorks Draw than you can imagine. It was like, I one time tried to suggest, I was like, hey Mom, most people use Microsoft Word. And she was like, what? No. I want this like canvas. And so she would do this and she would create, like the little name tags, but also like recipe cards. She would create coloring pages. She'd create all sorts of things for her. I nursed that program to work on her computer for many years. And one time I told her, I was like, hey, this is just not gonna happen. and she was like crestfallen. I was like, all right, I guess I'll try to make it happen again. So I honestly thought she was crazy for using it. But then, Adobe came out with PageMaker, and then PageMaker turned into X, and that turned into Y, and turned into Z. Eventually, that turned into Canva. Mom was doing the Canva thing before Canva was a thing. That's the kind of creativity Mom had, because things like Microsoft Word bound her in ways that they don't bind you and I, but her creativity was shrunk by that. That creativity shined brightest as she neared retirement in her garden. Before the condo that she lived in previously was the house we all grew up in, affectionately known as 2428. 2428 had the most beautiful gardens. Just exceptional gardens, as Liz shared, but they were always beautiful. I remember Tommy talking about one time, Mom had this hosta, and he referred to it as a man-eating hosta. It's so big, so incredible. But Mom would spend hours digging and shaping and creating with her hands. And that's the kind of creativity. I really considered stopping this right here. Sending you all off with high fives, hugs, and warm feelings. But I don't think that's right. I don't think we can talk about Mom without talking about the last 10 years of her life. These were hard years for her and for us. Abby once described the grief Mom felt about Dad's passing as breaking her spirit. And I think in many ways that's true. I think it's hard to reconcile that creativity, that vibrant life that Liz spoke about, that Tommy spoke about, with some of the things we felt in the last years. I think it's hard to reconcile that joy that she had. At least it can't be for me. So if you don't feel this, I apologize. I'll just sit here and monologue for a while. Isaiah 61 says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor." Now, he's not talking about financially poor. He's talking about the poor. He has sent me to bind the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom from the captives and release from darkness the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance for our God, to comfort all who mourn, and provide those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. You see, the Lord knows the loss that we are experiencing, the loss that she experienced. He knows that it's not right. Like there's something broken. There's something like not correct in this world, right? In your heart of hearts, in your still times, you know something's not right in this world. That's where the Lord steps in. Comforting those who mourn, a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. I find hope for you and I in that today. I also find hope in that promise from my mom too. The oil of joy, the garment of praise and comfort. No more despair, No more mourning. Beauty for ashes. John 14, 1-7 says, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, I would not have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you with me, so that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going, so how can we go there? Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. This is Jesus telling his disciples that he will soon be leaving them. And his disciples thought that was like bad news, that was crummy news. But Jesus is actually reshaping their thinking. He's trying to tell them that this is good news. When he goes, he's going to send a comforter, the Holy Spirit, an advocate. The Holy Spirit will remind them and us of what Jesus has said. He is preparing a place for us, a place for God. When my dad passed, I stood up here and I read 1 Corinthians 13. I didn't want to read 1 Corinthians 13. And so when I opened the document that was my mom's burial wishes, I was like, oh, there's 1 Corinthians 13. So I schlepped it off to some grandkids. But this final part of what I wanted to say, I wish I would have considered during my dad's funeral. So it applies to both the hope I feel for my mom and that of which I feel for my dad. As most of you know, my dad had cancer, and his body failed him in the end. Mom's body failed too. And I've wondered, what will that be like in heaven? What will that body feel like? I don't want that pain of my dad, but that's in some ways the way I knew him, right? Like I knew him as part of that pain. That's how I remember it. And I recently ran across 1 Corinthians 15 and it gave me some amount of hope. Verse 35 says, someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what body will they come? How foolish, Paul says. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or something else. But God gives us a body that he has determined, and to each kind of seed he gives his own body. Not all flesh is the same. People have one kind of flesh, animals another, birds another, and fish yet another. There are also heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies. But the splendor of heavenly bodies is one kind, and the splendor of earthly bodies is another. The sun has one kind of splendor, the moon has another, the stars another, and stars differ from stars. So it will be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable, it is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, and it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, and raised in power. It is sown a natural body, and raised a spiritual body. So again, there's this promise of redemption, right? Like that God is going to take what is broken here, fix it in the fullness of time. He's going to make all things right. That's the promise. So I mean this when I tell you that I'd love to see each and every one of you at the barbecue after this shortest. Please join us for weeping, mourning, laughter, and dancing. But before we go, I want to leave you with this. Many Jewish folks responded to me when I told them that my mom had passed with this phrase. They said, may her memory be a blessing to you. I hope through this time, the stories today and the hope that I've shared, that her memory be a blessing. Thank you. We're meeting at 40, back 40. We have plenty of room and plenty of